Don't stop the truck. Ethan Walker's voice was quiet, but something in it made his 9-year-old daughter Sophie look up from the back seat. 3 black SUVs were waiting outside the iron gates of Willow Creek Children's Home, their headlights glowing through the cold Vermont rain. Ethan's old Ford F-150 rolled to a stop beneath a maple tree, its wipers beating steadily across the windshield. Beside him, Claire Bennett had gone completely still. 90 minutes earlier, she had been a stranger standing beside a disabled rental SUV on a lonely county road. Now men in dark business coats were hurrying through the rain toward Ethan's truck as though they had been waiting for her all morning. One reached the passenger door first. Ms. Bennett, thank goodness. Claire didn't move. The board is already inside. Ethan slowly turned his head. Ms. Bennett. Sophie leaned forward between the seats, her small voice cutting through the hum of the heater. Dad, you know her? Ethan didn't answer. His attention had shifted to the leather folder tucked beneath the man's arm. Silver lettering gleamed beneath the gray morning light. Bennett Development Group. Ethan knew that name. Everyone connected to Willow Creek knew it. For 6 weeks, letters carrying that name had arrived with phrases like redevelopment opportunity, property acquisition, and final review. Polite words printed on expensive paper for something painfully simple. Willow Creek might not exist much longer. Ethan's hand tightened around the steering wheel. Not with anger, not even fear, just the quiet control of a man who had learned that dignity mattered most when life gave you every reason to lose it. Rain tapped against the roof. The engine idled. Somewhere beyond the gates, children were laughing beneath the covered porch, unaware that people in suits had gathered inside to discuss the future of the only home some of them had ever known. Ethan looked at Claire again. Her tailored coat was still damp from the roadside. A paper coffee cup Sophie had given her rested between her hands. 90 minutes ago, she had seemed tired, stranded, almost ordinary. She had never mentioned a company, never mentioned a board, never mentioned that the destination she shared with Ethan was a place her own company could change forever. You're Claire Bennett, he said. Claire swallowed. Ethan, I can explain. Ms. Bennett, the man outside interrupted, checking his watch. We really need to get inside. Ethan's eyes never left hers. Claire had spent years walking into rooms where people stood when she entered, where numbers moved because she spoke, where decisions worth millions waited for her signature. But inside that worn Ford, with a single father beside her and his daughter watching from behind, none of that power seemed useful. You could have told me, Ethan said. Claire looked down at the coffee cup. Would you have given me the ride? Ethan was silent for a moment. Sophie watched him. Claire waited. Then Ethan opened his door and stepped into the rain. Yes, he said. Claire looked up. Ethan reached behind the seat for his battered toolbox. That's the part you don't understand. And as he walked toward Willow Creek without looking back, Claire realized the 43 miles they had traveled together had brought her somewhere far more uncomfortable than the address on her schedule. It had brought her face to face with the kind of man her spreadsheets had never measured. 90 minutes earlier, the road had looked almost empty beneath a hard curtain of Vermont rain. Ethan Walker was guiding his old Ford F-150 along a narrow county highway, keeping the speed just under 40 miles per hour while the wipers struggled against the water. Sophie sat behind him with her backpack hugged against her chest, watching gray fields disappear beyond the fog glass. Then she leaned forward. Dad, there is somebody over there. Ethan saw the disabled SUV on the shoulder and a woman standing beneath the raised rear hatch, one hand holding a phone, the other pulling her coat tighter against the cold. He slowed. Claire Bennett looked toward the truck with the guarded expression of someone accustomed to solving problems without strangers. Ethan lowered his window. Rain immediately speckled his sleeve. You need help? I have someone coming, Claire answered. Her phone screen went dark. She pressed the button twice. Nothing. Ethan glanced at the empty road behind them. How long? Not long. Sophie looked from Claire to her father. Ethan understood that look. All right, he said. Stay dry. He began rolling forward. Dad. Ethan sighed softly. Sophie, she's getting soaked. For 3 seconds, neither spoke. Rain drummed against the roof. The heater rattled through the vents. and Claire grew smaller in the passenger mirror. Ethan stopped the truck. He backed carefully onto the shoulder and unlocked the doors. Claire stared at him as he stepped out with an old umbrella. "I thought you were leaving." "So did I." He opened the passenger door. "Where are you headed?" Claire hesitated. "North." Ethan almost smiled. Vermont is a pretty big place to call north. About 43 miles. That is a long ride. "I can pay you." Ethan's expression changed. Not offended, simply firm. "I did not ask." Claire studied him. Work boots. Faded flannel. Calloused hands. A truck old enough to complain every time the heater changed settings. Nothing about Ethan suggested the kind of person she usually trusted with her schedule. Yet nothing about him suggested he wanted anything from her, either. She climbed inside. Sophie immediately moved her backpack aside. "I am Sophie." Claire turned. "Claire, my dad is Ethan." "Sophie." Ethan started the truck. "What?" "She should know your name if she is riding 43 miles with us." Claire laughed before she could stop herself. It was small, almost rusty, as though the sound had not been used recently. Ethan pulled back onto the highway. For several miles, nobody spoke. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee, wet wool, and the cinnamon gum Sophie always kept in the cup holder. Claire watched Ethan drive with both hands steady on the wheel. He never asked what she did for a living. He never asked why she was traveling alone. He never asked why someone wearing a coat that cost more than his truck had been standing beside a rental SUV in the rain. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Why did you come back?" Ethan glanced at Sophie in the mirror. "Because somebody was watching." Claire followed his eyes. Sophie smiled. Ethan looked back toward the road. "Children remember what we do when helping someone is inconvenient." Claire said nothing. She simply turned toward the rain-streaked window, unaware that the man beside her was driving toward the one place she had spent the morning preparing herself to close. The rain softened after the first 12 miles, fading from a hard drumming against the roof into a steady whisper beneath the tires. Ethan kept his eyes on the winding road, while Sophie traced little circles through the fog gathering on her window. Claire checked her phone again. Still no signal. "How much farther?" she asked. 31 miles. "You keep track." "I keep promises." Claire glanced at him. "That sounds serious for a ride through the rain." "Most promises sound ordinary until somebody breaks one." Sophie looked up from the back seat. "Dad promised we would get there before lunch." Ethan smiled faintly. "And now my reputation is on the line." Claire almost smiled too. The truck climbed through a stretch of wooded hills where wet maples leaned over the road and small farmhouses appeared between curtains of mist. Inside, the heater clicked unevenly. A paper coffee cup trembled in the holder. Sophie's backpack slid gently across the seat whenever Ethan rounded a curve. Nothing in the truck belonged to Claire's world of polished conference tables, private elevators, and assistants who measured time in 15-minute blocks. Yet there was a strange order here. Ethan drove carefully. Sophie trusted him completely. Nobody seemed interested in impressing anyone. "So what do you do?" Claire asked. Ethan shrugged. "Maintenance. Carpentry. Repairs. Whatever people need. Your own business? When there is enough work to call it one. And when there is not, then I find work." Claire studied his hands resting on the steering wheel. Small scars from years of tools crossed his knuckles. His sleeves were worn near the cuffs. There was no embarrassment in him, no apology for the life he had described. That must be difficult with a daughter. Ethan glanced at the mirror. "She makes difficult things worth doing." Sophie grinned. "I'm also expensive." Claire laughed. "At least you are honest." Dad says honesty is cheaper than fixing a lie later. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I said that once." "You say everything once." "I remember it forever." Claire looked down, smiling into her hands. For the first time that morning, she forgot about the documents waiting for her signature. Then her phone briefly found service. Notifications flooded the screen. 12 emails. For missed calls. One message from Daniel Mercer, her chief financial officer. Final property review begins at 11:30. Community opposition expected. We need your authorization today. Claire immediately locked the screen. Ethan noticed the change in her face, but asked nothing. That silence unsettled her more than questions would have. You really are not curious about me? She asked. Should I be? You picked up a stranger. I picked up someone standing in the rain. Those are not the same thing. Ethan considered that. Maybe they should be. The words settled between them. Outside, a weathered green road sign appeared through the mist. Willow Creek, 22 miles. Claire stared at it longer than she intended. Ethan noticed. You know the area? Not really. Business trip? A pause. Something like that. Ethan nodded and let the answer stand. Claire turned toward the window, feeling the weight of everything she had chosen not to say. She had spent years believing information was power, that the person who revealed less controlled more. But beside Ethan Walker, secrecy did not feel like power. It felt strangely close to shame. Behind them, Sophie unzipped her backpack and searched through it. Claire. Yes. Did you eat breakfast? Claire blinked. Coffee counts. Sophie frowned with the solemn judgment only a 9-year-old could manage. No, it does not. She held out a granola bar. Claire stared at it, then at Ethan. He simply kept driving. She accepted it. Thank you. Sophie smiled. You are welcome. Claire slowly peeled back the wrapper as the truck continued north. And for reasons she could not explain, that $1 granola bar felt heavier in her hand than every expensive gift she had received in years. Sophie watched Claire take the first bite of the granola bar with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just solved an important problem. Better than coffee? She asked. Claire considered the question seriously. Do I have to tell the truth? Yes. Then yes. Sophie smiled. Ethan shook his head. You have created a monster. A well-fed monster, Claire said. And this time, Ethan laughed. It was brief and warm, disappearing almost as quickly as it came. But Claire noticed how different he looked when he allowed himself to be happy. The road curved between tall maples and weathered fences, while patches of pale morning light began slipping through the thinning clouds. For several minutes, the only sound were the tires against wet pavement and the crinkle of the granola wrapper in Claire's hand. Then Sophie asked, Do you have kids? Claire stopped chewing. Ethan's eyes moved immediately to the rearview mirror. Sophie, what? Some questions belong to people until they decide to share the answers. Sophie lowered her eyes. Claire looked at the little girl, then toward Ethan. He had not demanded an explanation. He had not filled the silence with nervous words. He had simply given her a way out while protecting her dignity. Claire swallowed carefully. It is all right. Sophie waited. Claire folded the wrapper between her fingers. No, I do not have children. Did you ever want them? Sophie. Ethan's voice was gentler this time. I know. Private question. Claire turned toward the passenger window. Rainwater traveled down the glass in thin silver lines, bending the trees outside into soft shapes. Somewhere inside her purse was an old hospital bracelet she had never found the courage to throw away. Years had passed since the pregnancy she had lost, but grief did not always leave when the calendar told it to. Sometimes it simply learned better manners. It stopped interrupting meetings. It stopped appearing in photographs. It waited quietly for a child in the back seat of an old Ford to ask the one question nobody else dared ask. Yes, Claire said softly. I did. Sophie became very still. I think you would have been good at it. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. Ethan reached for the radio knob. Sophie, find us something that does not sound like a commercial. The subject changed without ceremony. No pity, no interrogación. No attempt to repair something Ethan knew he could not repair. Claire looked at him. Thank you. For what? You know. Ethan kept his attention on the road. Then you do not have to explain it. Claire had spent most of her adult life around people who treated vulnerability like information, something to collect, remember, and perhaps use later. Ethan treated it like a door that belonged to someone else's house. He did not enter simply because it had opened. Sophie finally found an old country station, and a gentle guitar filled the cab. Dad likes old songs, she announced. Your father seems old-fashioned. I prefer reliable. That is what old people say. Ethan gave Claire a sideways look. You see what I live with? Claire smiled, but something inside her had shifted. She looked down at her phone, where another message waited from Daniel Mercer. We need a firm decision today. Willow Creek cannot delay the project again. Her smile faded. Ethan noticed, but remained silent. Ahead, another green sign emerged beside the road. Willow Creek, 14 miles. Claire stared at those words as the distance disappeared beneath the truck, and for the first time in years, she wished the road ahead were longer. The old country song faded beneath the hum of the heater as Ethan guided the Ford around another long bend. The rain had nearly stopped now, leaving the road dark and shining beneath a pale Vermont sky. Claire glanced at the navigation screen mounted near the dashboard, then at the time on her phone. I should probably give you the exact address. Ethan nodded. That would help. Claire opened the message from Daniel Mercer and read carefully. Willow Creek Children's Home, 187 Cedar Hollow Road. Ethan's hands became still on the steering wheel. Not tense, not frightened, simply still. Sophie stopped humming in the back seat. Ethan glanced at Claire, then back at the road. Willow Creek. Yes. The children's home? Claire hesitated. That is what the address says. Ethan looked at her again. That is where we are going. Claire froze. For several seconds, the only sound inside the truck was the soft sweep of the windshield wipers across glass that no longer needed them. You're going there too? She asked. We are. Sophie leaned forward. Dad is fixing the roof over the west wing. Ethan gave her a look through the mirror. Helping fix it. For free, Sophie added. Sophie, what? You are. Claire turned toward Ethan. You are driving 43 miles to repair a roof for free? Part of one. What? Ethan reached forward and switched off the wipers. The sudden quiet felt larger than it should have. Because it leaks. Claire waited for more. None came. That cannot be the whole reason. It is enough of one. Sophie looked between them. Willow Creek helped us. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Sweetheart, she's going there anyway. Claire did not speak. Sophie lowered her voice. After Mom died, people there helped Dad when things got hard. They helped me too. Ethan stared through the windshield. A red barn passed on the right, followed by a white church with rainwater dripping from its steeple. Claire suddenly understood why his answer carried weight. This was not another weekend repair job. I'm sorry about your wife, she said. Ethan nodded once. Thank you. No dramatic explanation followed. No invitation for sympathy. His grief had become like the worn leather around the steering wheel, something carried every day without announcement. Claire looked down at the phone in her lap. The word from Daniel's message seemed colder now. Final property review. Community opposition. Authorization required. She had read those phrases dozens of times. Until this morning, they had been business language. Clean, efficient, distant. Now one of those people was sitting 18 inches away from her, driving through the rain to repair a roof without asking for $1. What is Willow Creek like? Claire asked. Sophie answered first. Old. Ethan smiled faintly. Accurate. And the floors squeak. Mrs. Holloway makes amazing pancakes. There's a big maple tree by the playground, and the upstairs hallway smells like crayons. Claire looked at Ethan. And to you. He took a slow breath. It is a place people go when life has run out of easy answers. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. Ahead, a wooden sign appeared beside the road. Willow Creek Children's Home, 3 miles. Ethan drove past it without noticing Claire's face. She stared at those painted words while the truth pressed quietly against everything she had withheld. In less than 10 minutes, Ethan would learn why she was really going there. But Claire had already learned something worse. The property her company had reduced to acreage, cost projections, and development potential was not empty land. It was part of someone's second chance. The final 3 miles passed beneath a silence that felt different from the one before. Claire held her phone without reading it. Ethan drove with the same steady patience, while Sophie watched familiar landmarks appear beyond the window. There is Miller's barn. I see it. And the little bridge. I see that too. Then we are almost there. Ethan smiled. We are almost there. Claire looked toward him. You have been coming here a long time. Longer than Sophie has been alive. Sophie leaned forward. Dad used to live there. Ethan glanced at the mirror. You are giving away my entire biography today. You never tell anybody anything. Claire turned toward him. You lived at Willow Creek. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The truck crossed a narrow wooden bridge, tires humming over dam boards. A creek moved beneath them, swollen from the rain. "I was 12 when my mother died," he finally said. "My father had already been gone for years. There were relatives on paper, but nobody in a position to take me." Claire listened without moving. "So Willow Creek did? Mrs. Holloway did. The staff did. The other kids did in their own way." He gave a small shrug. "Nobody there pretended they could replace what I lost. They just made sure losing one home did not mean losing every chance at another." Claire lowered her eyes. On her phone, the acquisition summary waited behind a lock screen. 26 acres. Aging structures. High maintenance liability. Favorable commercial access. She had approved reports describing the property in numbers so clean they almost erased the people inside it. "How long were you there?" "Almost 4 years. And now you repair things for them." "When I can." Sophie smiled. "He fixes everything." "Not everything," Ethan said. The words were gentle, but Claire heard the history beneath them. "After Sophie's mother passed, I thought keeping the lights on and dinner on the table was enough. Mrs. Holloway reminded me that children need more than a father who survives the day." Sophie reached forward and rested her hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder. He covered it with his own for 1 second, then returned his hand to the wheel. Claire looked away, giving them the privacy of a moment that happened only inches from her. "Your company must keep you busy," Ethan said. Claire's breath caught. "My company? Whatever company has been sending you messages every 5 minutes." He smiled faintly. "I'm guessing nobody texts that urgently about knitting." Claire almost laughed, but could not. "Yes, it keeps me busy. Do you like what you do?" No one had asked her that in years. People asked whether business was strong, whether growth was on target, whether investors were satisfied. They never asked whether she liked the life those answers had built. "I used to," she said. Ethan nodded, as though that answer deserved no judgment. The trees opened ahead, revealing a broad lawn and a weathered brick building with white columns. Children in bright raincoats stood beneath the covered porch. Near the west wing, blue tarps stretched across part of the roof. Ethan's face softened. "There it is." Sophie pressed both hands against the window. "Mrs. Holloway is outside." Claire stared at the building. It looked nothing like the photographs in the development packet. The photographs had shown deteriorating gutters, cracked masonry, and inefficient land use. They had not shown children's drawings taped inside the windows. They had not shown bicycles beneath the porch. They had not shown a little boy holding a red umbrella while waiting for someone to arrive. Ethan slowed near the entrance. Then his expression changed. 3 black SUVs were parked beside the iron gates. Claire recognized them immediately. Her executive team had arrived early. Ethan noticed the vehicles too. "Looks like somebody important is visiting." Claire said nothing. The Ford rolled closer. A man in a dark business coat spotted the truck, raised his hand, and hurried toward them. Claire closed her eyes for half a second. The road had run out, so had the time for hiding. "Ms. Bennett, thank goodness." The words landed harder than Claire expected. Daniel Mercer stood outside the passenger door, rain beating across the shoulders of his charcoal coat, while 2 members of the development team waited near the black SUVs. Ethan looked from Daniel to Claire, then to the silver lettering on the folder beneath Daniel's arm. Bennett Development Group. For one long second, nobody spoke. "Ms. Bennett?" Ethan asked. Claire turned toward him. "Ethan, I can explain." "The board is waiting," Daniel said. "We moved the final review forward. The property council is already inside." Ethan's eyes settled on Claire. There was no anger in them. Somehow, that made the moment worse. Sophie leaned forward. "Claire owns the company?" Daniel glanced at the child, confused. Claire answered quietly, "Yes." Ethan switched off the engine. The sudden silence filled the cab. Rain ticked against the windshield. Beyond the glass, children moved beneath the porch while Mrs. Holloway waved toward Sophie, unaware of what had just changed inside the truck. Ethan opened his door. "You could have told me." Claire followed him into the rain. "I know. When I was trying to find the right moment." Ethan reached behind the seat and lifted out his battered toolbox. There were 43 miles of moments. Claire looked down. Daniel stepped closer. "Ms. Bennett, we need your authorization before noon." Ethan stopped. Authorization for what? Claire met his eyes. She could have softened the language. She could have borrowed the careful phrases her attorneys preferred. Instead, she told him the truth. My company has an option to purchase this property. The board wants to redevelop it. Sophie stared at her. Ethan said nothing. The plan is not final, Claire continued. That is why I came personally. To decide whether this place stays? Yes. The words seemed painfully small. Ethan looked toward Willow Creek. The blue tarp over the west wing lifted gently in the wind. A little boy on the porch was holding a red umbrella upside down, laughing as rain collected inside it. Ethan breathed slowly. Claire waited for accusation. None came. Would you have given me the ride? She asked. Ethan turned back. If you knew who I was? If I had told you beside the road? Ethan did not hesitate. Yes. Claire blinked. Even knowing why I was coming here? You were standing in the rain. His voice remained calm. That part would not have changed. Claire had negotiated with people who demanded favors before offering kindness. She had met people who changed their voices when they learned her title. Ethan had known nothing about her and had helped anyway. That is the part you do not understand, he said. He started toward the building. Sophie remained beside Claire for a moment, disappointment replacing the easy warmth that had been there during the drive. Then she hurried after her father. Ethan, Claire followed several steps. I did not lie because I thought you were beneath me. He stopped beneath the old maple tree. Then why? Claire searched for an answer that did not sound like an excuse. Because people treat me differently when they know. Ethan nodded. I understand that. Claire looked surprised. You do? Sure. He glanced towards Sophie. But you decided what kind of man I was before giving me the chance to show you. Claire had no defense against that. Ethan adjusted the toolbox in his hand. I have a roof to fix. And I have a decision to make, Claire said. Ethan looked at Willow Creek, then back at her. Then make it after you see the place, not after you see the numbers. He walked away without another word. Claire remained beneath the dripping branches while Daniel opened the leather folder beside her. On the first page, Ethan Walker appeared under a heading she had barely noticed before, local opposition. Claire stared at the two words. 90 minutes in his truck had taught her more about him than months of corporate reports. And for the first time that morning, she wondered how many other human lives had been reduced to two words on a page. Inside Willow Creek, the conference room smelled faintly of old pine, coffee, and rain carried in on wet coats. Claire sat at the end of a long oak table while Daniel Mercer opened the development packet in front of her. 26 acres, he said. Commercial access from the state highway. The projected return remained strong. Another executive turned a page. Renovation would cost more than relocation. And the residents? Claire asked. Daniel paused. The transition plan provides alternatives. Alternatives where? 3 licensed facilities within 70 miles. Claire looked toward the window. Outside, Ethan stood on a ladder beneath the edge of the west wing roof, fastening a loose section near the blue tarp while Sophie carried small tools between him and a gray-haired woman Claire assumed was Mrs. Holloway. 70 miles, Claire repeated. Daniel leaned forward. Claire, we have reviewed this for months. On paper, that is what due diligence is. Claire said nothing. Numbers covered the pages before her. Acquisition cost, demolition estimate, projected revenue. Every column was precise. Every calculation was clean. Yet none contained the smell of crayon Sophie had described, the maple tree outside, or the fact that a 12-year-old Ethan Walker had once arrived here with nowhere else to go. Daniel slid a pen toward her. We need your authorization. Claire picked it up. Through the glass, Ethan climbed down from the ladder and tested the repaired gutter with one hand. He did not look toward the conference room. He was not waiting for her approval. He was simply finishing what he had promised to do. Ms. Bennett. Mrs. Holloway stood in the doorway, holding a folded piece of paper. I believe Sophie left this in your vehicle. One of your associates brought it inside. Claire accepted it. Thank you. She unfolded the paper. It was a child's drawing in bright marker. An old blue truck sat beneath enormous gray clouds. Ethan was behind the wheel. Sophie was in the back. Claire sat beside him, holding a granola, bar much too large for her hand. Across the top, Sophie had written 5 uneven words. The day we helped a lady. Claire stared at the word lady. Not chief executive officer. Not developer. Not millionaire. Just a lady who had been cold, stranded, and hungry enough for a 9-year-old to notice. Daniel cleared his throat. We have another meeting at 2. Claire placed the drawing beside the contract. How much of our projected return depends on clearing this property? Most of it. Then change the project. Daniel blinked. Excuse me. We are not demolishing Willow Creek. Silence settled across the table. One executive slowly closed his laptop. Daniel lowered his voice. That decision will cost us. Claire looked at him. Then find another investment. The board will want an explanation. Give them one. What explanation? Claire glanced through the window again. Ethan had moved to another section of the roof. Sophie stood below, laughing as Mrs. Holloway tried to keep an umbrella from turning inside out in the wind. Tell them we finally completed our due diligence. Daniel frowned. I do not understand. Claire set the pen down. Neither did I this morning. She turned the contract around and pushed it away. We measured the land. We measured the buildings. We measured the cost of moving everyone somewhere else. Her voice remained calm. We never measured what this place is worth to the people who needed it when they had nowhere else to go. Nobody answered. Claire folded Sophie's drawing carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Ethan looked up as a thin line of sunlight crossed the wet roof. He had no idea what had just happened inside that room. Claire watched him for another moment and understood something money had never taught her. Power could take a place away. Grace was knowing when not. 3 months later, Willow Creek looked almost the same from the county road, and that was exactly what Claire had wanted. The old brick walls were still there. The maple tree still stretched over the playground. The upstairs floor still squeaked. But the west wing had a new roof, the windows had been repaired, and a small brass plaque near the entrance carried the name of a new community partnership designed to keep Willow Creek independent for years to come. Claire had refused to put her own name on it. People should know what you did, Daniel had told her. Then let them know Willow Creek stayed open, she had answered. She had learned that redemption did not need a spotlight. Sometimes it needed restraint. Ethan had learned something too. Claire had not returned with an oversized check and expectations of gratitude. She had returned with accountants who listened, contractors who asked questions, and a financial plan that gave Mrs. Holloway control instead of taking it away. She came on Saturdays when she could, sometimes in jeans, sometimes still wearing the coat she had worn to a meeting an hour earlier. Sophie stopped calling her Ms. Bennett after the second visit. Ethan took considerably longer. On a bright October afternoon, he was finishing the white paint along the playground fence when Sophie ran across the lawn. Dad, Claire is here. Ethan looked toward the driveway. Claire stood beside a new silver SUV. Nothing was wrong with it. No smoke, no dead battery, no rain. Ethan smiled despite himself. Claire walked over carrying 3 paper cups. Coffee. You remembered. Black. No sugar. Sophie accepted her cup. Hot chocolate. Extra marshmallows. Sophie nodded approvingly. You can stay. Claire laughed. Ethan wiped paint from his hands with an old rag. Board meeting nearby? No. Car trouble? No. Lost. Claire looked at him for a moment. Not anymore. The answer quieted him. Sophie, sensing something with the mysterious accuracy children sometimes possess, announced that Mrs. Holloway needed help inside and disappeared toward the building. Ethan watched her go. She absolutely invented that. She is learning strategy. From you, apparently. Claire smiled. The afternoon light rested warmly across the lawn. Somewhere behind them, children were arguing cheerfully over a basketball. Leaves moved across the pavement in the October breeze. There was no conference table now, no contract between them, no title Claire needed to hide. I owe you one. Apology, she said. Ethan leaned against the fence. You already apologized. I know. This one is different. She looked toward Willow Creek. I thought people respected power because power deserved respect. You showed me that respect has to be earned when nobody has anything to gain from giving it. Ethan was quiet. You made the right decision. Eventually still counts. Claire looked at him. Seconde chance. I believe in them. Good. She glanced toward his Ford parked Near the workshop. Because I was wondering if you might give me another ride. Ethan looked at her perfectly functional SUV. You drove here. I know. So where exactly do you need to go? Claire smiled. Wherever you and Sophie are going. Ethan studied her for a second, then reached into his pocket and held out the Ford's passenger key. That is a dangerous answer. Why? Sophie picks the music. Claire took the key. I have survived worse. Minutes later, the old Ford rolled beneath the Willow Creek sign and turned onto the county road. Sophie talked from the back seat. Claire laughed beside him. Ethan drove toward the golden Vermont hills as evening settled across the valley. 3 months earlier, they had shared an address without understanding what it meant. Now, there was no contract waiting at the end of the road, no secret identity, no decision worth millions. There was only a father, a daughter, and a woman who had discovered that grace sometimes arrives in an old truck when life leaves you stranded. Some people spend years believing a destination is a place on a map. But the roads that matter most often lead somewhere quieter, toward trust, toward dignity, toward the courage to begin again. And sometimes, if we are fortunate, they lead us toward people willing to travel the rest of the way beside us.